I'm the young wolf. This is the wolf pack. Let's get into talking about communism and socialism. An all too common trend among the modern populace, including the populace of the right, is a misunderstanding about what, if any, differences exist between communism and socialism. What differentiates one from the other? Let's talk about that right now. In short, communism and socialism are the same thing. One sounds a little bit better and is a little bit more marketable within democracies, but it's kind of like deciding whether you're going to order a Big Mac or a Whopper. Both are going to give you a heart attack, both are going to make you unhealthy, both sound good and maybe even look good, but neither are good for you or your family. Communism and socialism are two parallel roads to the same exact destination. They want the same endpoint. They differ slightly on how they get there, but don't let that fool you. They want the same exact thing at the end of the day. But don't take my words for it. Here are the words of Marx and Engels, the founders of communism. Here they reference in their book, The Communist Manifesto, the fact that the Communist Manifesto is a piece of socialist literature, directly implying their belief that communism and socialism want the same thing. Elsewhere in the manifesto, they speak glowingly of socialists and have very few critiques and criticisms about how better to get what both communists and socialists desire as their end goal. In short, both socialism and communism desire an authoritarian, elitist ruling class that controls every single element of your life. Your religion, your economic practices, your family practices, everything is run by the government and by these elites. The way that they get there is slightly different. This is why I say they want the same exact thing, but they have somewhat different ideas of how to get there. The easy way to think about it is that socialists are a little bit more of a light touch movement. Socialists view to get to their desired endpoint through social change. Socialists are okay slowly infiltrating throughout generations your entertainment industry, your schools, your local government, your federal government. Does any of this sound familiar? They seek to bring social change through those leadership positions and slowly bring the populace to where they want them to be. Communists are a little bit more heavy-handed. Marx and Engels spoke about this quite openly. They're perfectly okay with the idea of seizing power and eliminating all opposition, whether that come from organized religion, from opposing political parties, or from anyone else. Here I must make the careful point that democratic socialism is not a thing. It doesn't exist, or at least if it does exist, it's just a redundant name for something that already exists. Democratic socialism is just a dressed up term meant to make socialism sound more palatable to citizens of a democratic country. And as we now know, socialism is just a dressed up term, a parallel road to communism. Democratic socialism means nothing different from socialism. Almost every socialist authoritarian throughout history was elected democratically. That's how they work. They get power, whether through a corrupt democratic process or outright through a legitimate democratic process. They lie, cheat, and steal their way into power, and then they hold on to it with an iron fist. Before we go any further, if you want to help support or partner with Red Liberty Media, you can donate to our Patreon right here. Next, let's consider low-end estimates of the costs of these destructive ideologies. We can look at Mao, Stalin, Fidel and Raul Castro, and Hitler. And yes, Hitler was a socialist, as was the Nazi Party. Here we need to take another quick rabbit trail to explain how Hitler and the Nazis were indeed socialists, as they claimed to be. First of all, we have the name, the National Socialist Workers' Party of Germany. That's what Nazi means. Some people will contend with this and say, well, what's in a name? After all, Saddam Hussein claimed that he was a democratic leader. The People's Republic of China claims to be a people's republic. We know that names are easy to claim, but harder to live up to. That's a fair enough point. So let's talk about a little bit of the Nazi policy of World War II era Germany. Centralizing the means of production. This is a grandiose way of saying the government owns and controls everything. Your housing, your local economy, your entrepreneurship efforts, everything. Socialist and communist idea, Hitler and the Nazis did it. Restricting firearm ownership. Socialist and communist idea, Hitler and the Nazis did it. Standing against and vastly limiting free practice of religion and religious organizations. Socialist and communist policy, Hitler and the Nazis did it. We could continue down this road of policies, but the bottom line is, contrary to what modern pop culture historians have tried to do in rewriting history, Hitler and the Nazis were National Socialists. So let's go back to Stalin, Mao, the Castro brothers, and Hitler and the Nazis. Together, they account for more deaths than any wars driven by religion throughout history. Again, modern pop culture knowledge would have you believe that Christians and/or Muslims, Catholics, are the ones who have driven most discrimination, most deaths, and most authoritarian rule throughout history. That's simply not true. That award belongs solidly to socialists and communists who also coincide with humanist and atheistic worldviews. Lastly, are there any examples of successful socialist or communist countries? Countries where socialists and communists gained and maintained power and then drove it into the future to a utopia, which is essentially what both socialists and communists promise to the people who put them into those positions of power. The short answer is no, of course not, because these systems work on two flawed beliefs. Number one, that humans are not inherently flawed and can be fixed if only we give all the power to the right people. And number two, that those right people will never become corrupt elitists. Once they hold all the cards, they will do what's best for you and your family, not for them and their inner circle. Of course, these two assumptions are utterly false. Indeed, we see that socialist and communist countries where most of the power has actually been retained by socialist and communist leaders, like the Castro brothers, Mao, and Stalin, see the highest death tolls out of any country leadership system throughout history. But what about other countries, some will say? What about Denmark and Sweden? Aren't they shining examples of socialist success stories? Again, no. That's smoke and mirrors. Number one, all of the countries like Denmark and Sweden that are used as examples of acclaimed, alleged socialist success stories built their wealth, prosperity, and stability on the backs of free markets, of capitalism and democracy. Only very recently, in the past decade or 2 decades in some of these countries, have more socialist and communist ideals and policies come into practice. What does this mean? It means that all of their wealth, safety, stability was built with one type of practice. And now another practice is slowly seeping in to what is not a socialist economy, but not a fully free market economy. It's a mixed economy. And now as those policies come in, all the success built by the capitalism and democracy is being claimed by the socialism creeping into the system. That doesn't make any sense, but yet it's claimed as a success story by the proponents of this view. But you know I don't like making you just take my word for it. So here's what the Prime Minister of Denmark had to say when socialist Bernie Sanders tried to tout his country as a socialist success story. In short, the Prime Minister said, "We're a market economy. We're not socialists over here." And that's exactly true. These are market economies that, granted, are adopting more socialist and communist ideals into their mixed economies now than they did perhaps 5, 10, or 15 years ago. They're still very much mixed market economies. To call them outright socialist or communist is a real stretch, especially when we look at how much they depend on their surrounding free market neighbors and trade partners like the United States. It is even more of a stretch, though, to credit the success of these countries to the socialism and communism that has recently begun to seep in. This success, of course, belongs to the years of free market and democratic processes that built up those countries to what they are today. Don't fall for the lies that are democratic socialism, communism, or any combination thereof. That's all for today. Have a good one.